Hi, everybody. Fiore here. And I'm going to talk today about one of my favorite writers, Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft lived in the 18th century. She wrote the first book, uh, uh, which people see as the founding of feminism, the founding text of feminism, called A Vindication of the Rights of Women. And I would like to call it a masterpiece, and I would like to call her a great role model and hero. The book is a complex book. It not only talks about political rights for women at a time when women not only could not vote, but had no representation and had severe restrictions in many ways, financially, legally. And Mary Wollstonecraft herself was a great person, very courageous, a great defender of people, a great fighter for social justice in her personal life and in her writing. And yet, I don't want to call it a masterpiece because in the spirit of Wollstonecraft, she did not believe in the idea of masterpieces. I mean, the book itself, in fact, is a breakdown of very popular, very powerful books of her time, including the Bible. And she believed that we should look at books as a representation of culture, a kind of a container of cultural ideas, and criticize those parts of books which uphold certain conventional injustices. And that's what her book is all about. And that's why it's complicated to call it, and people have called it in the past the founding text of modern feminism. There is no feminism at the time, and there is no word feminism at the time. But it's the founding text of modern feminism from one point of view, because she's the first one to really go into what creates gender, in this case, the gender of woman. She talks about how it's created, how it's a conventional type of idea about the way a certain group of people should act, and the assumptions of the way, the characteristics of certain people, in this case, woman. She calls it sexual character, not gender. But she doesn't do it through a kind of advocacy for certain policies. She does a couple times mention representation in Parliament, but she does it through an analysis of many, many books. And she's able to do this because she herself was the first woman that I know of in Anglophone culture in North America and Britain, who made a full living without sponsors, without aristocratic help, without subscribers. At that time, if you wrote a book, you would get a list of wealthy subscribers who would help you publish it and help support you. She's the first woman to do it by herself, through her own efforts. I'm not going to say by herself, but through her own efforts. So she fully supported herself, and she made enough money not only to support herself, but to help the people around her, her younger siblings, young woman who she took in. So she lived that life of advocacy and courage, at a time when women barely were able to get out of the home in order to fulfill their potential in public. And that's what she wanted for everyone. She knew she was different and special, but she really discouraged this whole idea of having a role model or a hero. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. In fact, Wollstonecraft, for me, is a hero. But she had a special reason for this. And she says this in chapter 4 of her book, where she says, it's not about women admiring other women or admiring great people. It's about each person fulfilling their potential and being able to feel they're making progress towards a full and rich life. And she had a religious kind of overtone to this. As well. In other words, to fulfill the talents and skills that were given, were imparted to you upon your birth. So that's what Wollstonecraft's all about. Let's take a look at a couple parts of the book following the theme of today's talk, which is the political and the personal. So here is the cover of the book. You can see at the bottom, it's published in 1792 by Joseph Johnson. At the time, there were no companies, of course. And they were basically people who, usually publishers are people who owned the presses, the bookstore, and had deals and contracts with writers. And so Joseph Johnson was her publisher, a very generous person himself. And the name of the book is called A Vindication of the Rights of Women. and with strictures on political and moral subjects. So people expected this to be political. Other people looking at the subtitle expected it to be about education. It's both, but it's more. It's actually a cultural kind of survey of the most powerful texts of her time. This is, here is Wollstonecraft with a little bit of retouch done by a student of mine. Wonderful, but this is also a great photo of the portrait that's hanging right now in the Tate Gallery in London. And there she is with her book, reading her book. Her hair is undone to represent the freedom to think, the freedom to write. And in the background, you can't see it in the full painting. There's a feather, so she's a reader and she's a writer. And let's take a look at the beginning of the book, which is a dedication to Talleyrand. Talleyrand was a member of the French Assembly. At this time, the revolution was in full progress. It had started in 1789. The king was no longer in power. Louis XVI has not been executed yet, but he's out of power. And they are putting together a new government, a republic, in fact. And Talleyrand is one of the members of the National Assembly of Republican France. And Wollstonecraft writes a dedication. Dedications were very common at the time. They were usually written to the person who sponsored a book, maybe an aristocrat, or maybe to the subscribers. But Wollstonecraft had never written a dedication, and she never would again. And this dedication is kind of sarcastic, I wouldn't say sarcastic, but it's not your typical, thank you for sponsoring my book kind of a dedication. She, in fact, says, I've never written a dedication before, and this dedication is not here to praise you, but to criticize you. I heard you are going to propose a policy for a national education in France. And in this policy, girls are supposed to be educated to, learn to sew and cook, take care of kids. And boys are supposed to be educated to learn rhetoric and speaking, diplomacy, maybe languages, maybe athletics. So you can see right away there's a problem. Even in 1792, that was a highly repressive and gendered way to look at boys and girls. There were many intellectual, successful women at the time and many highly accomplished women recognized for their skills. I talked about Catherine Macaulay before. So Wollstonecraft is not doing anything spectacularly different, but the way she does it is spectacularly different. And so in this dedication, she talks about, she starts out by saying, look, this is not the way to go. You have a great opportunity here. You have a new country. You have a chance to set up a national education system. And what do? You propose that women should sew and cook and stuff like that. Now, Talleyrand is influenced by Rousseau, a philosopher that you may know. I'm sure you do. But that is no excuse, because Wollstonecraft is well aware of Rousseau, also an admirer of Rousseau. But both Talleyrand and Rousseau are in for a big shock in this book. Her dissection and I wouldn't say destruction, her dissection, analysis of Rousseau is a big part of the book. Rousseau is not alive anymore at this time, but she does go after him, and she goes after his most famous book on education. But here she is at the beginning, and she talks about Talleyrand. She talks to Talleyrand directly. She says, having read with great pleasure a pamphlet which you had lately published, I dedicate this volume to you. So she did not read it with pleasure. It was a ridiculous proposal. And the volume has nothing to do with Talleyrand. It goes into much deeper things than Talleyrand's proposal, but that's how it begins. And to induce you to reconsider the subject and maturely weigh what I have advanced respecting the rights of women in national education. So there's a lot going on here. One of the goals of these talks that I'm offering here, that I hope you guys will like, is that to look at these classic texts in maybe new ways that we're reading between the lines. We're trying to get more out of the text, go deeper into the text, so that you guys have stuff that you might want to write about. If you're a student, you're writing an essay. If you're a person who's well aware of these texts, maybe a different perspective, maybe you can argue for a different way of looking at them. So here, what is happening that's different? What is happening that's different? You may even pause the video and think, what is this person who's writing this? What's the message here in the way she's writing this? Now notice, he's a legislator. She's a woman, not allowed to vote. But she's addressing him as if she were a legislator, as if she was standing on equal ground with him, as if she didn't even have a sex at all, or a gender at all, to use a modern term. Okay, so she's actually creating, here's my theory, see if you like it, a virtual space. She's creating an internet. She's creating a forum. She's saying, here's a forum. We're both in this virtual space, right? This textual imaginary space. And I am addressing you as an equal. And she even says, you have to disregard what she calls my sex, right? And look at the next part. I call with the firm tone of humanity. And the word firm has a gendered overtone, right? For my arguments, sir, are dictated by a disinterested spirit, another word that's usually used by speakers, orators, right? A Cicero, perhaps, a Thomas Jefferson, right? Let's say, well, that's actually a bad example, but let's stick with Cicero, right? So she's speaking in this classic way, right? Disinterested. In other words, I speak for humanity. I don't speak for a particular group. I speak for the right of humanity, the rights of humanity, the ethics of this society, right? The ethics that we should rise to. And this word disinterested is so powerful. I plead for my sex, not for myself. Independence, I have long considered as a great. So all these grand words that are, maybe evocative of a Roman forum, right? And she would have been totally against the patriarchy or the Roman forum, but she's taking her role there, standing firm in this virtual space. So that's a way of looking at the beginning of the book. And we'll get to line by line as she starts to go through the dedication and then how she opens her first literary commentary in chapter 2. But I want to jump to the end now to the personal. We talked about the political. Now let's talk about the personal. This is late in the book. It's chapter 12, and the name of the chapter is called On National Education. So she has her own policy for how young women and young men should be educated. She believes they should be educated together. There should be no boys' schools and girls' schools. She believes that there should be a national educational system. There was none at the time, none in France or England or the United States. And here she has, I just picked a little part that might be fun to think about. You may pause the video and think about this question. Do you think that it is valuable to teach kids an appreciation for creative arts, literature, painting, architecture, music, poetry? And do you think that these things should be taught, assuming that people need to be taught an appreciation of these things? Now, today in many schools, the curriculum includes the production of creative works, right? Kids are encouraged to draw and write poetry, and it's wonderful. And Wollstonecraft was actually part of the movement to bring experience into education long before John Dewey, and Rousseau as well, to be fair to him. But here she says something interesting about whether or not the appreciation for the creative arts, the creative products of humanity should be included in education. She says, definitely. And look at the way she makes her argument, very interesting. She says, a taste for the fine arts requires great cultivation, but not more than a taste for the virtuous affections. You see? So she's saying an appreciation for art, for the arts, let's say for the arts, is just as important as learning how to take care of your neighbor and to advocate for justice. See, that's what she means by the virtuous affection. By this point, she has played with the word virtue to the point where it has lost its original masculine meaning. The word virtue is based on the etymology, a Latin etymology, vir, which means man, basically. To be a man is to be virtuous. But Wollstonecraft has completely deconstructed this word. And by virtuous, what she means is those qualities which help us, first of all, to fulfill our full potential as human beings, which should be shared by women and men. In other words, it should be aspired to by women and men. We should both aspire to the great virtues. And those qualities which also contribute to furthering your society, because she has a very, let's say, civic notion of how people should be in society. In other words, people should be contributing to society. And we'll talk in another video about how that relates to classic republicanism and other ideas like that. But here, she's combining this pretty unanimous concept of the virtuous affections. In other words, this idea of developing yourself to the highest level possible and contributing to your society. And she's combining it with a taste for fine arts, and both should be cultivated. So it's not, today in the modern world, we might say, well, if I like a painting, I like it. If I don't, I don't. If I like rap music or classical, that's up to me. But she's saying, no, actually, you cultivate a taste for art. So, you may agree or disagree with her, but she's making a complex argument here for the education of children, what they should be learning. Now, that's different, very important. It's different than the Talleyrand proposal, which is, along with sewing and cooking and things like that, little girls should also learn to play piano and learn to, draw. But this is not the same as a cultivation for fine arts. And this is one of the beauties of the book, that Wollstonecraft makes so many fine distinctions. Because to learn to play music and draw, just so you can be admired as a girl, because that's what a lot of girls played piano back then, other instruments, not to become great concert pianists like the great concert pianists of the 20th, 21st century, but to kind of attract attention as a woman. She's totally against that. And you'll read other parts of the book where she says, no way. But she's totally for a deep kind of rich appreciation of the products of human creativity. And in other places, a rich appreciation of places like what's behind me here, of nature and architecture and the way human and God created items, let's say, can be deeply appreciated by human beings. And I purposely said God created because she is a Christian, and Christianity plays a special role as well. There's many aspects of the book that we'll talk about in future talks about Wollstonecraft, but for now, I will leave you here with this little tidbit, and I hope you guys will continue with me and explore this extraordinary book by Mary Wollstonecraft, the mother of Mary Shelley, who's maybe the most famous novelist who ever lived, right? Frankenstein, is that not the most well-known novel of all time? We'll talk about it. See you guys later.